Welcome to Desperately Seeking the 80s. I am Meg.
And I am Jessica. And Meg and I have been friends since 1982. We got through middle school and high school together here in New York City, where we still live.
And where we podcast about New York City in the 80s. I do Ripped from the Headlines.
And I do pop culture.
Jessica, you know my really good friend Michael.
Yes.
This week I saw him at rehearsal.
Yes.
And he said he listens to our podcast every week. He's completely up to date.
Oh my God.
And he said, it's so funny how you guys just sort of assume that your New York City experience was universal. And he was like, he's a musician. He had never heard of Rock Lobster ever in his life.
Is that really a New York thing, though?
Apparently. And he grew up in Rochester.
But I mean, like, they're from Georgia.
I'm telling you.
Maybe he just wasn't a new wave person. What did he listen to?
He'd heard of the B-52s, but he'd never heard that song.
I love that. That's so funny. Well, no, look, do we assume that ours is the only New York experience? No, we have Travis as our dear good friend. We know that our New York experience is
but
not.
He's from New York too.
No. I thought he was saying like that we have this one perspective.
Or that we assume that whatever was happening with us was happening all over the place.
Oh, well.
Probably.
No, we don't. We don't think that.
Such a funny look on your face. In other words, like, I mean, if it wasn't happening to us, who cares?
I mean, if a tree falls in the forest, does Rock Lobster play? I don't know.
Went to college.
Yeah, yes, I did.
In the Midwest.
Yes, I did.
Right?
Yes.
I went to college in the Northeast, but then I went to graduate school in California. And that's when I was introduced to things that were just not New York at all.
Yeah, guess what? The Midwest in the 80s, not New York.
I'm curious when you had, or if you had, an experience with a jacuzzi in the 80s.
I mean, that's such a weird open question, but it's funny. Like, one thing occurred to me that I didn't even do this, but it struck me as like, who does this? At Kenyon, winters were pretty beastly.
Yeah.
And they did all kinds of things to make it less, deeply depressing. And I forgot what it was, or if it was like associated with a frat or something, but they had a giant hot tub jacuzzi, like a huge one, right on Middle Path outside of like where one of the upperclassmen, a small dormitory entrance was. And it was snowing, there was snow every place. And so all of these people would sit in the jacuzzi wearing, hats, and then come flying out and roll in the snow and then go get back in it.
That sounds like fun.
If you're into that kind of thing.
But that counts.
I guess, yes.
My sources are American Swing, which is a documentary, The Washington Post, New York Times, Village Voice, and Time Magazine.
You didn't ask me if I'd been to a key party, though.
No, I did not. Have you?
No, but I did go to a party at Kenyon freshman year. I didn't stay for the real shenanigans, but they did, again, like it was Midwest, this tiny school. And what are you going to do? You're going to do drugs and have sex. And so they had naked cocktail, like it was the artsy kids, naked cocktail parties, and everyone would get in, strip down, and then lock the door. So yeah, but that wasn't for me. Yeah.
Okay. But you didn't do that, but others did.
Yeah. I went to the pre-party, but I was like, I'm not stripping down for you freaks. Forget it.
On November 12th, 1985, Philip Carril, an undercover police officer with the Public Morals Division, paid $45 and entered Plato's Retreat.
Oh, I just love Plato's Retreat. It's come up now like 4 times. I love it.
Plato's Retreat was a swingers club for straight couples and bisexual women at In 1985, at least, it was at 509 West 34th Street. A man approached Philip and offered him a blowjob for $10.
It's a good price.
Later, a woman offered more elaborate services for $25. Earlier that week, the city had shut down the Mine Shaft, the gay S&M bar in the village under the new anti-AIDS health code, which banned oral and anal sex between men. The 13-member New York State Health Council determined any establishment, and I'm putting that in quotes, that permitted, quote, high-risk sexual activity, which they declared was anal sex and fellatio, would be shuttered. The emergency regulation would be in effect for 60 days. At first, only gay bathhouses were targeted for closure. At that time, heterosexual activity was not considered risky. But there was a newly adopted anti-discrimination law that said gay people could not be refused employment, housing, or services. So, Ed Koch directed inspectors to check out Plato's retreat, just to be fair. But let's back up a few short years to 1977. Plato's retreat was the creation of Larry Levinson, the son of a kosher butcher in Brooklyn, and a high school friend of Al Goldstein.
It all comes together. Do we make the meat market joke or no?
You just did.
Okay, move on.
I mean, can you imagine they went to high school together? Al Goldstein and Larry Levinson?
They had to go to high school somewhere.
I mean, imagine being teachers in that high school.
Let's hope they weren't in the same classroom. But maybe they were really
friends.
Well behaved, and then
really
they just got freaky
friends.
later.
Anyway, so when Larry was still a family man, he met a woman at a cocktail bar who introduced him to her husband and the swinging lifestyle. Now, swingers at the time described themselves as committed couples who had consensual recreational sex openly with other people. I do not know if it is a term that is used now or if it's changed its definition, so I'm being specific that this was the 1977 definition.
That is the way in which I've always understood it.
Right. Larry was smitten. His wife less so. So he got a divorce and opened his first swingers club in 1977 in the basement of the Kenmore Hotel on East 23rd Street between Lexington and 3rd.
Are you kidding me?
No, I'm not, which I pass every single day on my way to the gym. Now it is a single-room occupancy hotel. I did a little bit of a deep dive on the former Kenmore Hotel. Fascinating history, but I don't have time to tell it right now, but I think I might do that for a future story. It's just friggin' wild.
I am so excited.
That same year, apparently with an infusion of mob money, he moved Plato's retreat to the basement of the Ansonia at 74th and Broadway, where the Continental Baths had had its heyday. Now, the Continental Baths. Continental Baths was a gay bathhouse in the early 70s, late 60s that featured a young Bette Midler singing with Barry Manilow on piano. Other acts, Melissa Manchester, Ellen Green, the Manhattan Transfer, Waylon Flowers.
Oh, well, that's not a surprise.
Nell Carter.
Oh.
And it was this huge pool. And these are amazing acts, right? But the problem, the bathhouse/cabaret club business model was actually its downfall. Because gay patrons stopped coming because they felt they were being gawked at by the people coming to hear the music.
Oh.
And the Continental Baths closed in 1976, just in time for Plato's retreat to swoop in. The rules for Plato's retreat were, it was a members-only establishment, paid $25, no men unaccompanied by a female, no male-on-male sexual activity. Woman-on-woman was encouraged. Unaccompanied women got in free. No alcohol or drugs because they had no liquor license, and no paid sexual services. But all of that was very hard to enforce, and quaaludes were a big deal at Plato's retreat. So people were smuggling stuff in.
So they were super mellow.
There was a heated Olympic-sized swimming pool, a steam sauna, 60-person jacuzzi.
Wait.
A 60 person jacuzzi.
I can't think of anything I would less like to be in than a simmering bowl of other people's ick.
Oh, just hold on a second. There was a clothing optional disco floor,
Oh, that's not going to look good.
a free buffet featuring lasagna, meatballs, lo mein.
What?
Apparently, Larry was really into the buffet. He was just like very proud of it. And some people were like, yeah, you can really,
Get your money's worth. Loading up on lasagna before you get busy.
And other people were like, that's disgusting.
Yeah, that doesn't, it seems both unhygienic and just too heavy for the activities on deck.
A labyrinth of thinly walled private rooms. A backgammon lounge.
Random.
I mean, backgammon, Quaaludes, Bill Cosby, all part of the whole scene. Not that Bill Cosby went to, but Bill Cosby talks a lot about how the 70s were about backgammon and Quaaludes.
Really?
Yes, but I don't think that he ever went to Plato's Retreat. Otherwise, I feel like I would have come across that fact. And the mattress room.
I just barfed again.
The mattress room was especially intimidating, according to those who lived to tell the tale. It was just a writhing pile of naked bodies. Now, celebrities and porn stars and Wall Street types would visit, but really the bread and butter was bridge and tunnel.
Isn't that always the case?
Quote, kinky types from the suburbs, dry cleaners and their wives, or fat men in toupees with their heavily made up girlfriends. That's a quote from The Sky's the Limit by Stephen Gaines. One woman, and buckle your seatbelts for this. I should have, this is actually a trigger warning.
I'm actually going to lean back. All right.
One woman described swimming naked in the pool while men lined both sides, ejaculating over her like fountains.
Into the pool.
Yes!
I can't. No. There's not enough chlorine in the world to make that not the worst thing ever.
What? To make extra money, Larry opened the club for kid parties during the day. When are they cleaning this place?
What?
When?
What?
Are they cleaning?
What, like pool party and the pool is just
so awful.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Were there no germaphobes in the late 70s? What?
Did the parents know?
Of course they did. It's a big sign that says Plato's Retreat.
That's only for the most, I mean, that's for parents who were having a laugh. Like they had to have been just like, this is so dumb.
Did they touch anything?
Did they wrap their children in saran wrap?
For a while, it worked well and everyone was happy. There were more women than men. And if the woman said no, that was respected. This is from a Times magazine article. Quote, the guy who wrote the article went to Plato's Retreat and just wrote an article about what he witnessed there. Mm-hmm. Quote, a tough-looking woman stands at the liquorless bar wearing only a flowered blouse and high heels. A bartender whispers
she's
to
got
her.
the Winnie the Pooh outfit on.
It's so true. Also, I've seen the videos. There was no landscaping happening.
Oh, it's the 7. No, right. That's the era of Big Bush. Let's say it. Okay.
A bartender whispers to her. Tell him to ask me himself, she snaps. I don't deal through intermediaries. She has been married for 15 years and swinging for 13. Now she is jaded. She will only settle for, quote, a man with hunger in his eyes. And no.
Oh, like the Eric Carmen song, Hungry Eyes. Isn't that like, wasn't that the Dirty Dancing?
Oh, hungry eyes.
Yeah. I'm sorry. My tone was not recognizable.
And no hungry-eyed man had happened by for 3 nights. So she strolls off to proposition a woman, close quote. The article goes on to say, quote, oddly enough, there is less sexual electricity in the air than at a Rotary Club party. All the trappings of the normal sexual dance, talk, gestures, and clothing are stripped away as unessential, and emotions are under tight control. As a result, the proceedings are amiable, but flat. Close quote. The mat man of the mattress room is quoted as saying, "We never have any troubles here. These are good people. I'm more of a shepherd looking after my flock."
Oh, that's so sweet.
His main role was to make sure that the male-female ratio stayed intact. Couples did not have to stay together in the mattress room, but if a man leaves to go to the bathroom, he has 2 minutes to return or his girlfriend will be ejected. Interesting.
Mm.
And exchanging phone numbers is the cardinal sin of swinging because it can lead to emotional attachments.
Mm.
Now, as long as the rules were followed, life was good. Larry and Al once had a contest for who could ejaculate more in 24 hours.
I read about this. So there is a book written by, now I have to find out who wrote it. It was lent to me by you.
What?
Was it you?
Me?
You had a crazy book about, you gave it to me and you were like, you're going to love this. It's about totally messed up New York. And it was written by a guy who was like working for the New York Press or something. And he did all of these like seamy underbellies of New York stories. And I think that this was him. That was his article. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember who won?
Larry.
Larry won 15 times in 24 hours.
I mean, the fact that he was still alive. See, you know what? It was the lasagna. He was fortified. That's why he wanted that hot buffet so very badly.
But 1980 ruined everything. Upper West Side neighbors were getting grumpy about the single guys lined up outside trying to pick up women so they could get in. And Larry's girlfriend, Mary, who was his business partner and public female face of Plato's Retreat, was less committed to the swinger rules as Larry and had an emotional relationship with their limo driver.
That slut.
Well, no, she just wanted love. Really, it's the opposite.
I was kidding.
The limo driver ended up beating Larry to a pulp. And then the Neighbors Association paid Larry $1 million to leave the Ansonia and to relocate to 509 West 34th Street. Now, the new cavernous space, which is now a parking garage, did not have the same ambiance. Larry was sent away for tax evasion in 1981, and by the time he got back in 1984, the rules were not being followed. Sex workers had infiltrated and brought with them a harder, scarier vibe. They started having singles nights that would start with male strippers to get the women in the mood. Then they would let in a bunch of horny guys and mix in prostitutes and cocaine.
That just
No,
sounds
it's
so,
just so
unhappy.
Well, right. And originally, when it was at the Ansonia, people actually described it as wholesome.
Right. Rotary Club.
And this was down and dirty. And then there was AIDS. Many people were spooked and stayed home. The ones who continued to have group sex were more hardcore and self-destructive, which affected the mood of the place considerably. Larry insisted that the intense amount of chlorine on the premises killed off the AIDS virus.
Oh, Larry.
But it was a hard sell. There was definitely anal sex and fellatio going down on November 12th,
going down.
1985. But that's not what shut them down. It was the prostitution, which was a much easier charge to prove. Plato's Retreat reopened briefly in December, with Larry pledging all profits would go to AIDS research, but was shut down permanently on New Year's Eve, 1985. Larry fell on hard times, living in a basement apartment in Queens and driving a cab before dying at 62 in 1999 after quadruple bypass heart surgery. So much for those meatballs.
I was just going to say lasagna.
Back in the good old days, Larry told a reporter for the Washington Post, "You go to singles bars and what do you get? All that bullshit. how rich the guy is, what he can do for you. Ever met a married man at a singles bar? Nah, of course not. Everyone says he's single. You go home with him? Can't wait to get rid of him, right? But here at Plato's, it's refreshing. No bullshit. No telephone numbers, exchange. After a sexual affair, he takes her back to the bar. You don't have to listen to all that crap. You ask the guy, who are you with? He tells you. He says, I'm here with my wife. To me, that's solid. That's refreshing. No bullshit.
He's not wrong.
It was a special time, I guess.
Well,
it's hard. I do not see the appeal at all. But in the documentary, I saw a lot of interviews with women who were just like, it was fantastic. I loved it.
well, it was an early peeling back of sexual, I wouldn't say mores, but rules for women in the way. And it's interesting that it all started with bathhouses, because men being given free reign, gay, straight, or otherwise, to simply want sex and want it in an uncomplicated way. That's from the dawn of time. I think that the appeal for certain women must have been that they were playing by the same rules.
Yeah. And that it was empowering.
Right.
But then you sort of dig just a slightly deeper, and the homophobia of it is unsettling.
This is going to sound ridiculous. When was it ever easy to be gay? Right?
I'm just saying that I think that it, in fact, was incredibly patriarchal, the setup at Plato's Retreat, even though it didn't seem that way on the surface.
Well, of course, it was created by Larry Levinson and his headspace.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, it was for him.
It was for him.
That's it. And so was it clever? And was it a byproduct for a certain kind of woman who would want to explore her liberation in that way? Sure. Was it also for women who wanted to please their men?
Right.
Right?
Probably.
Like, what are the motivations?
Think about Mary.
Right.
You know what ended up happening with Mary? Nothing good. No one ever knew her last name, which I think is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And when she and Larry did break up, she ended up working on the street as a prostitute, and then she disappeared. Yeah, nobody knows what happened after that, but not a happy ending.
Unsurprising. I think that...
But she went on all those shows. She sat next to him, on Donahue and all those shows going like, yes, I love it too. It is wonderful for me. She was the female face. He used her.
Right. And that's the thing.
And couldn't have given a crap what she wanted long term.
I wonder, is it that he didn't give a crap, or that it didn't even occur to him to give a crap?
I don't know.
Right? I think that's even a more frightening question.
Yeah.
Rather than making a nasty decision, not knowing you have a decision. Well, Larry Levinson and his pool of jizz sounds really, really unappetizing and of a moment.
Seriously. I mean, now think about it. Now we walk around with like Purell fiends.
I mean, what I also love is that, and I love also that he must have gotten the idea of doing the children's parties because of the Roxy roller rink, right? And so, they can do it, and it's a gay club. But then, no one was jizzing in a pool for children to roll in. Larry, no. It's so gross. It's like I'm actually have like a little gag reflex.
And it wasn't like, okay, a lot of the story is pre-AIDS.
I mean, that would be a great name for the club. Larry Levinson's Jizz Pool.
But there were other sexually transmitted diseases. It wasn't like we've talked about it on the show.
It's the tragedy of herpes.
I know.
The tragedy of chlamydia.
But also like crabs. I mean,
what don't you can, yeah.
They knew that they knew it was gross. They knew it was gross.
I'm sure that for them it was not for some reason. That was absolutely, because then it's their big male gross. Think about it. I'm even getting a better picture now. It's this big, sweaty, hairy, male gross playground where I'm going to be Larry Levinson for a minute. So you got naked chicks walking around, and you got some meatballs, and then you got, you don't have to actually chat someone up. You could just wave your dick at them. And then,
You don't have to have a conversation. You don't have to.
You don't have to do anything. You just show up. You're like, huh, meatball. And then miraculously, some foolish woman would be like, that's a pretty good looking meatball, Larry Levinson. I need to get up in that. Or maybe I'd like some lo mein. Sign me up. But the whole thing is geared to be the easiest lay for the grossest men.
It seems like
it's like incel paradise. Incels didn't exist at the time because you could go to Plato's retreat. All you had to do is to convince some hooker to go with you, right? Pretend you're my girlfriend.
Oh, that totally happened.
And you get a free meal. And that's it. That's it. Any woman who was there, if it was really on her own steam, I feel pretty certain that at least 5 years later, she would be having a, what was I thinking? Kind of moment.
They interview a few of them in this documentary, which is really good. And they swear it was the best thing that ever happened.
Well, they don't want to turn back now. They certainly look foolish. I don't know. How can we possibly understand the sexuality of the late 70s and early 80s?
Exactly my point. Exactly.
And thank God we can't. In a very short time, you'll see what our tie-in is.
I'm very excited about that.
So I began our journey today by doing my favorite thing, which is what happened on this day in. So I chose 1982. And I don't know why I did. It just felt like the right year.
Okay.
I don't know why. I was feeling early.
All right.
Okay. We were about to enter 8th grade together. My first year knowing you. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why it felt just so right. So I'm scrolling through the newspaper and I'm looking like, what's going on? There's all kinds of weird information. And I didn't know this, that the New York school system had to desegregate teachers. Isn't that interesting? Because
that is interesting.
Right, white teachers were in Manhattan primarily, and teachers who were not white were in the outer boroughs. So they were actually busing teachers.
Gosh, okay.
So there was a whole flap over that. And as I kept going, and I'm always like, what's in arts section and what's in metro section? What caught my eye was that there's an article by Pulitzer Prize winning, but by no means at that time, author Anna Quindlen. And it had the very oblique title, About New York.
Okay.
And I was like, where are we going to go with this? So I'm going to do a little reading.
Okay.
Okay. And this also made me think of our friend Travis. The dark sedan went down the street in the Greenpoint section of Brooklyn, then backed up and went down the street again. The car had red and white Indiana plates. So did all the other cars parked on the street. The people who live in the neighborhood sat on the stoops. A young man in a sweatshirt with an easy, ambling walk came down the street after the car had backed up for the second time. That's the murderer, Detective John Lafferty of the New York City Police Department said quietly. I hope we get a good confession from him today. They were making a movie in Greenpoint. Okay. And Detective Lafferty, a rangy man with straw-colored hair once the same ginger shade as his eyebrows, was helping them. The television movie is tentatively called Trackdown, and Detective Lafferty is the technical consultant.
Okay.
One of its stars is a former New York City police officer. One of its producers, Sonny Grosso, is a former city detective who helped crack the French Connection case.
Fascinating.
The movie is about the police search for a young man who murdered a teacher he met in a bar on New Year's Day. Detective Lafferty knows something about that. On January 3rd, 1973, he was a detective with the 4th District Homicide Squad. The phone rang, a report of a woman stabbed to death in a studio apartment on 72nd Street west of Broadway. Who's up? Detective Lafferty said, looking around his office. He was. And so he began to investigate the murder of Roseanne Quinn. Do you know who Roseanne Quinn was?
No, I don't.
We sealed off all the entrances to the building, Detective Lafferty recalled, as he watched the sedan approach a gray 2-story building in a scene meant to show the moment when New York City detectives finally tracked the killer to his brother's home in Indianapolis. There was no way he could have gotten out of there. Even if he could have, I'd have jumped off the roof to get the guy. Our tie-in today is Looking for Mr. Goodbar.
Oh.
So in 1973,
Totally.
Roseanne Quinn, school teacher.
Yes.
For deaf kids. Like, could it be more perfect for TV or movie? I think not. She is murdered in her home by someone ostensibly who she picked up from a bar.
Right.
And so I did a little bit of a dive into the Mr. Goodbar book and then the movie that was based on the book.
Okay, the story that you started with about the filming in Greenpoint
is not the filming of Looking for Mr. Goodbar, the film, which was 1977.
Okay.
In 1973,
it's just Lafferty is the connection.
Miss Quinn
okay.
was murdered. 75, yes. The book Looking for Mr. Goodbar came out. 77, the movie with Diane Keaton came out. In 1982, they are filming another movie about the murder of Roseanne Quinn.
Oh.
And Lafferty is the technical consultant because he was actually the cop on the job.
Got it.
And that's what Anna Quinlan is describing.
Wow.
Is what it is to be on set for this film that's about something that happened in New York 9 years earlier.
Got it.
What I thought was really fascinating, because of course, then I went back and I looked at the original murder and then the Diane Keaton movie. And what was so shocking to me, and we were just talking about sexual mores and like what's okay for women and, you know, what's female behavior socially and what's male behavior. And so the way that this whole thing was portrayed was really that it was her fault and that she was
risky behavior.
That's the phrase, that she was doing drugs. She was picking up men in bars. She was doing PS, what everybody else did. It wasn't unique. It wasn't special. She was just the kind of person who that wasn't supposed to happen to. She was white. She was a school teacher for deaf kids.
Right.
It made for a great story.
Who did kill her? Like, who was there anything interesting about the guy?
No, he was just a pickup.
But anything more about why he did that?
Because he was a murderer.
But had he done something like that before? No. Did he have a violent background?
Let us read on.
Okay.
It will be 10 long years next month since Detective Lafferty caught the Roseanne Quinn case on his first day back from vacation, but he still remembers every bit of it. The murder of the 28-year-old teacher of deaf children was a big story in New York City. It exposed the sad underside of the holidays. So that's why this is a topical story as well.
Oh.
Of the holidays and of the life led by young men and women alone on their own. It was important because in some ways it was typical. Roseanne Quinn met a man in a bar. She brought him home. Only the ending was different from the 1,000 other nights in 1,000 other bars. She was murdered. 5 months later, in jail, her murderer killed himself. Mr. Grosso was one of dozens of detectives who canvassed the streets around Roseanne Quinn's building for information about her life or death. I always wanted to do a movie about this, said Mr. Grosso, whose projects in television and movies since he left the force have revolved around police work. It's a chance to highlight what good detective work is. Steve Kalura, who plays a detective in the film, was a police officer from 68 to 75. I was an actor and Sonny talked me into joining the department, he said. He said to me, I want to show you what the real acting is. He took me up to Harlem and made an undercover drug buy. Mr. Kalura was one of the undercover officers assigned to pick up street information on the Quinn murder. So what I also thought was really interesting is that 10 years have gone by. So the book and the movie, the original ones, were about the woman.
Right.
And about, look what happens when you make bad decisions. This movie, 10 years later, is a procedural. And it's how did we catch him? It was about the crime and not how she made moral mistakes.
Okay.
So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, how does our look at these kinds of crimes? And we look at a lot of them on this show, right? Like every person who's been made into soup and fed to homeless people or have body parts on the headboard.
But it also makes sense because certainly in the late 70s and early 80s, people became very interested in policemen's stories and experiences.
Indeed.
That became quite the genre.
10 years ago, it was important for John Lafferty, son of Irish parents from the Bronx, to find the killer of Roseanne Quinn. Today, it is important to him that the story be told right. George Siegel is playing a detective who's loosely modeled on Detective Lafferty. George Siegel, who ruled the early 80s and 70s. If you don't know who he is, we're going to have a photo of him.
Yeah.
Like, to say ubiquitous is to not even cover it. There are all those important little touches in the movie, like the fact that the killer ordered a 7 and 7 in a bar and mispronounced Chablis, leading detectives to suspect that he might have been from out of town.
Ooh.
Right?
Because
Don't you
New
love
Yorkers
that?
know how to say Chablis.
I wonder what he did say, like
Chablis.
Chablis.
Yeah.
Chablis.
Probably, right?
But that would mean that he had a reading vocabulary of it. That's interesting. Maybe he was reading a sign.
Yeah, he was
Like,
reading something off the menu. I'll have the Chablis.
Oh, the Chablis. Yes, of course. I just imagine him bellying up to the bar and announcing Chablis for all.
So wait, and he lived where? Indianapolis?
Indianapolis.
And they tracked him there?
Yes. Lafferty said, "This is like a mirror, but don't make me sound showbiz. I'm on vacation. I'm going back to my real job as soon as this is over." Detective Lafferty has enjoyed the temporary work. A precinct house was constructed on a pier in the Hudson River for the production. And Detective Lafferty says it's even nicer than the one where he now works.
I bet.
He says he never saw Looking for Mr. Goodbar, the movie said to have been inspired by Miss Quinn's life. And he says that one reason he decided to work on this movie is because it focuses on the police investigation, not the victim's life. Even at this point, I'm very concerned about the family, he said. I know how my mother would feel if she had to have all this stuff dug up again. The last thing I want is to hurt the family.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I thought it was really interesting. And so for me, this little moment, finding this little article brought a lot of things together. Anna Quinlan, at the beginning of her career, she had been working for the Post, graduated up to the New York Times. A woman writing about the murder of another woman 10 years earlier. And she's in a power position because she's writing the story. So that's kind of interesting. And then, as I said, like they'll look back on how women's fate was treated in reality and in pop culture.
Right.
And that
there's sexual liberation.
Exactly. And that sexual liberation or experimentation.
Exploration.
Larry Levinson will inevitably lead to disaster.
No. I mean, in one case.
Ask Mary No Name.
Fair. But there were lots of women. There were lots of women interviewed.
No, I'm
in
not
that
saying that I agree with
document.
it, obviously. You know, it was just a snapshot of like what happened in 10 years. Like what's the difference in looking at a crime in 10 years and to have it through the lens of a liberated woman who was not the age of the woman who was killed. She's a bit younger, and the police officer who saw it all. And that his response at this time in his life is leave the family out of it.
Right.
That the lurid part of the story was no longer appealing.
I mean, the implication is that he felt like it had been sensationalized.
And blamed the victim. So clearly, we don't need to work too hard on a tie-in today.
So our tie-in is women's sexual liberation.
Exploration
with a lot of questions and consequences.
Yes. I mean, it's so interesting. The other thing that I really enjoy examining is that sometimes, you have to read these stories a few times because you have to cut through the bias.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to kind of be a detective yourself when you read these newspaper stories because you're like, okay, how can I strip everything away and find the facts?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you remember our first story was Connie Crispo, and oh my God, that man, the man who wrote that article about her, it was dripping with condemnation.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, hold on a second. She seems to be doing pretty well by my estimation. Fuck off,
Yeah.
Judgy Judgerson.
Jerry the Judge Judgerson.
And he was, I can't remember his name now, but that reporter was very well respected. But for him to be the storyteller, it just puts this particular stamp on it.
Yeah. I mean,
of condemnation.
And in a way, how else would he think of it? Right? Because that's how he was programmed.
Right.
You know, and it's appalling and galling to have to admit, like, oh, well, you know, that hideous bias that we bump up against now, you know, it wasn't that person was particularly horrible or narrow-minded. It's so much
in
a
the
product.
water.
Larry Levinson's water.
No. Oh my God.
I think everyone who's ever done anything nasty to a woman should be forced to soak in the Larry Levinson pool with their mouth open.
Yeah. Oh God. Now, okay, here's an interesting question. So many pools in New York.
Yes.
All these bathhouses, all these apartments that had pools in the basement. That's crazy.
That's luxury, baby.
I know.
That's
I want a
living
pool.
high on the hog.
Yeah, I wonder what's up with the Ansonia pool now.
Well, the
Is
other thing
anyone
that struck
ever
me,
going to go in it?
who knows? I mean, what struck me as interesting was that it was the Ansonia,
Right.
which is like a really nice building.
Incredibly
So
nice
like,
building.
what the hell? It's like saying, well, in the basement of the Dakota,
Right.
there was a wild leather club, you know, with
big fat hairy men in there
and
secretaries.
food. I can't get over the food. Okay, I'm just going to be honest with you. That's the detail. The pool of jizz and the lasagna. I will never ever get over it. That's the thing, and that's how I know who Larry Levinson was. It says everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I know what he looks like. I know what his focus is. I know what he's like to talk to. I know how.
Were there napkins?
Ew.
Were they wiping their hands
Were
on
there napkins?
sweaty body?
I love you. Were there napkins? No, they were just hosed off in the wet room afterwards. Do you know what I mean? Like the person who's like sex and lasagna is like, it's only working on the most base instincts, right? It's like a step up he's manimal. He's a manimal. And
They also describe these little disco bags that were like velvet pouches that had Plato's Retreat written on them. That was their merch. You could get that.
Was it like a proto fanny pack of some kind?
Yes.
So you'd like carry around like your locker keys and if you're lucky, a condom, maybe.
I do not think there were any condoms.
Maybe
happening
some
in this
penicillin
place.
was in there. I don't know, a Z-Pack, something.
Yeah. I think it was for your Quaaludes and your locker.
Oh my
key.
God, you're right. It was the Quaaludes. Yes, your Quaaludes. Oh, and your lipstick.
Oh,
Maybe you had to like
you gotta
freshen up.
reapply every
Exactly,
time.
every time. So yeah, and I think about poor Roseanne Quinn, who's out there, lonely, looking for love, and the Larry Levinsons are bellying up to the bar.
All the wrong places, looking for love in so many faces.
All the faces at Plato's Retreat staring back at Roseanne Quinn. Bad. Very bad. But I mean, think about it. Like, yeah, looking for Mr. Goodbar because there's a sea of creeps. It must have been, I mean, there are always creeps, but that was like licensed creeps. Creeps who have been given a stamp of approval.
A single woman in the 70s must have sucked.
Yes.
You think?
I think that if you were a single woman past 25, it would have sucked because the goal was still to get married, and you married before you were 30. Right? So if you were anywhere from 25 to 35, I mean, honestly, can you even imagine?
No.
Because you have the social pressure to hook up.
Right.
Like if you are not married, you have failed. Yeah. So you're more likely to marry a Larry Levinson.
Oh, God.
I keep throwing up in my mouth every time I think about him.